Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting of the Human Resources Committee to order for July 7, 2023. And I'll begin with a land acknowledgement. By recognizing that Ottawa is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. The peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived in this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continued to influence this land. The Ottawa Police Services Board honors peoples and land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Today, Ottawa is home to 40,000 First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Ottawa's Indigenous community is diverse, representing many nations, languages, and cultures. The Ottawa Police Services Board honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. I also want to say that we are currently on Zoom, although not broadcasting. Are we live streaming on YouTube?
No, our live stream's not working right now, so people can join Zoom.
So through this meeting, we are in fact experiencing some technical difficulties in that we were not able to broadcast on Zoom or live stream. And given that the meeting is being held in this way, there is that possibility of technical difficulties. And with respect to any disruptions, I'm just going to ask that everybody remain patient as we work to fix these and resume the meeting as soon as possible. Our first order of business is the election of a committee chair. And at this time, I'd like to open the floor for nominations.
I would like to nominate Peter Henschel as chair of the committee.
Thank you, Member Doucette. Are there any further nominations? Okay, seeing none, I will now ask for a motion to close nominations.
Motion. Okay. Motion to close.
All in favor? Okay, thank you. That carries. Member Henschel, congratulations on being elected chair of the Human Resources Committee. And I will now turn the meeting over to you. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Chair Beck. I will now proceed with the confirmation of the agenda. That the Ottawa Police Services Board Human Resources Committee confirmed the agenda of the 7th July 2023 meeting. Is the agenda confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed.
Thank you. So we'll move then to the confirmation of minutes, or minutes number 14 of the 30th of August 2022. That the Ottawa Police Services Board Human Resources Committee confirmed minutes number 14 of the 30th of August 2022 meeting. Are the minutes confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest?
No.
Okay, so we have none. We have 2 items of business for the public portion of our meeting, and 5 items of business to be considered in camera as they pertain to labor relations matters. We'll begin with the public items. First one is the review of the board resourcing requirements. The executive director prepared a report for the committee's consideration, which you have received. The report provides some context for the review of the board's resourcing as well as information on our current staffing. It also identifies some gaps to inform our needs assessment and possible resourcing options to consider. Finally, it includes an analysis of staffing at the other Big 12 boards in the province. Toronto has the most substantive staffing model of all of the boards. And for this reason, we've invited the acting executive director and the chief of staff for the Toronto board, Dubi Kananagisa, to be here with us today to answer any questions we may have specifically about the Toronto model. So Dubi, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time to share your thoughts. I understand that you haven't necessarily been with the board long enough to have some of the historical context around the staffing model. So we'll try to focus our questions more around the current state. So I guess maybe as a starting point, I would be interested just to hear the experience or the value that's added by having a fairly significant board office that has people focus on certain things like policy and governance and other areas, and what value that adds for you as board members in the Toronto Police Service Board.
Thank you for inviting me. As you mentioned, the Toronto board has a fairly large staff. We have currently 8.5 positions, including the executive director, and we are recruiting for 3 more. Sorry, 7.5 and recruiting for 3 more. These positions are split between policy-oriented positions and more executive assistant and administrative assistants. As far as the policy side of the board staff is concerned, we have 3 positions. One is a senior advisor for stakeholder engagement. One is focused more on communications, media relations. And the third is strategic analysis, so focusing more on collection of data, analyzing information that's received from the service, and providing advice to the board with relation to that. And any policy work that there is, and there's quite a bit of policy work that has been done over the past few years in Toronto, is split between these 3 roles based on the most appropriate person for each. So I think in terms of the value that the board gets from these positions, first let me start with the stakeholder relations and engagement role, which I think is probably one of the more important ones. It provides access to opinions and views and really the preferences of large swaths of the community, which are not necessarily accessible to board members, who are, after all, representatives of the community, but may not be may not have the opportunity to speak with people from very diverse communities. We have, of course, 3 councillors, and we have other members of the community who have access to their relative parts of Toronto, but the stakeholder engagement role really is dedicated to keeping in contact with community leaders, with organizations from across Toronto, and bringing these voices in and making sure that whenever there is a policy development process or strategic planning process, these voices are brought forward and they are heard effectively by the board. And that's not necessarily something that's always easy to do. I'm sure your board knows well that deputations at board meetings don't necessarily reflect the whole diversity of the community. So that allows us to really hear a more diverse voices and an opportunity to get a broader scope of these voices. Second, speaking of the strategic analysis role, the benefit there is really reducing drastically the reliance on analysis by the service. And that's exactly what that role was created for. Every board is dependent to a large degree on information that is gathered and analyzed by their respective services. What that means is that there's little expertise and little capacity to analyze it independently and to understand where there may be gaps, where there may be issues with the analysis that was done, and not in the sense of anyone trying to hide something, but at the end of the day, police services are not themselves designed to do a lot of this analysis work, and they don't have necessarily access to the same public perspective that the board has. They have a more operational perspective about these things. So having this role independent of the service and dedicated to the board's perspective allows the analysis to really reflect the voices that are heard. And I can say, as the person who was in charge of this role, it's the work of these two roles side by side, the stakeholder engagement and the strategic analysis is really important and provides perspectives that the board would not have had otherwise, and really informed the board's ability to make policies that are not only responsive to what the communities want and what the public wants, but also are able to push the envelope on how the governance system around the service works and how much that interaction between the board and the service creates value for Toronto.
Great. Thanks very much for that. I'll open it up to my fellow board members, see if they have questions for Duby.
I've got a question, if I may, and thank you for that, Duby, and thank you so much for being here today. You're currently at 7.5 and moving to 10.5. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
And do you feel that 10.5 is the right number to support the board from its perspective and its role?
For the time being, and we haven't recruited those positions yet, that's what we believe. That's why we recommended to hire those additional people. I should maybe say who what those positions will be. One of them will work with the stakeholder engagement and focusing on Indigenous engagement, which is a gap that we have found in our ability to engage with that in the specific community. And the other two are analyst roles that will work with the strategic analysis senior advisor and assist in collecting information separate and apart from the service. So actually going out and collecting information from city, from different partners, conducting surveys, which will help the board get an external perspective on the impact that the initiatives and the policies are having on the real life at the street level for Torontonians.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe a follow-up question, and I know I'm fully cognizant that policing in Toronto is very different from policing in Ottawa. So it's difficult to extrapolate from your numbers, what would be right for Ottawa. Roughly, I think Toronto is roughly 4 times the size of Ottawa from a number of sworn and civilian members. Do you think it's somewhat of a linear mapping based on size to representation on the police services board? I know it's a really simple question, but I'm just trying to think down the road. Clearly, we need more help. We've got a lot on our plate as the executive director and the staff. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
It's probably not a linear relationship. I think there's a lot of overhead, especially as we expand our understanding of what the board's role is, and taking into consideration that board members that's not their job, it's not their full-time job. So there's only so much time that can be expected of them to dedicate to it. And the fact that as the matters that are facing boards get more complex and more professionalized, boards will require more and more of that kind of professional policy perspectives and advice. So there is a certain overhead. I would say personally, I think the situation right now where most boards have 2 or less staff members is not sustainable. It's hard to say how many exactly are necessary. I would start with an assumption that 4 is a more likely number for most boards, and that would include an executive director, a board administrator, a a policy expert that would ideally be able to carry out the stakeholder engagement role, and then more of an administrative or executive assistant role to support all of that. In particular, if you take into considerations, I don't know exactly about Ottawa, but for Toronto, we have 2 advisory panels that provide also more public voices, and the administrative work around those and the logistics around those is not insignificant. So I would say these are the 4 roles that are key. So in this format, that one policy role would have to be more of a jack of all trades. And my advice would be to start with that and see to what degree that workload on the policy specialist, which could be shared to some extent with the executive director, depending on the workload, see how that works and consider expanding, maybe separating the 2 roles that I discussed before at a later date. But that's the approach that we've taken at Toronto, which is to slowly grow and understand where our needs actually are, rather than balloon up all at once and then find work for people that is not necessarily there.
Great, thank you.
Chair, I have some questions.
Yes, please go ahead.
So first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to meet with us and to bring your advice to us. In the document that we've been provided with, I noticed that there's a list of the positions at the Toronto Police Board. And when I look through them, it seems to me that outlines fairly well the various skill sets that are necessary. And I guess on a smaller scale, given the differences in size, that that could at least be for the executive director, as she's looking at this, an idea of what kind of skills matrix is needed within the staff of the Ottawa Police Services Board. Does that make sense to you? Just to start there?
Yeah, like I said, the difficulty really is that the policy position, if it's all in one, has to have a lot of very different skills. I know I, for one, would not have been very good as a stakeholder relations advisor. That takes a skill set that is quite different from what I bring. And media relations also is a different kind of skill set. So you need to find a fairly exceptional person to have that role all rolled up into one. To your question, yes, I think these are the different skills that are needed. To what degree you can roll them up into fewer positions, that's a question that you'll have to work with your recruitment people.
So another question that I have is, this is the permanent positions. Can you give us an outline approximately and just some comments around the number of consultants? Because it mentions in the document that the Toronto Police Services Board uses a number of consultants at any given time. Can you give us a little bit more idea of that?
So we're getting legal counsel from the City of Toronto. So that is a permanent arrangement where we have people assigned to us from the city, and on occasion we have engaged with consultancies to do more specific and large-scale work. there was a Deloitte report a year ago or so on workplace harassment. To give one example, sorry, and with regards to labor relations, we sometimes engage outside counsel on that. That is pretty much it as far as external counsel. The drive has been over the past few years to have more internal capacity that specializes in the needs and the framework of Toronto, rather than bringing external people in.
I'm assuming that with the staff you're looking at, you have your own internal human resources specialist?
No, we share human resources work with a service.
And finally, so I think Ottawa has a
if I
really
can add,
unique.
sorry, just I would say there's very little turnaround in our office, so it's not very frequently that we recruit people. The last person that was recruited to our office was me in 2019, and now we're doing another round of recruitments, but we don't expect to be doing this on a continuous basis.
So I have to say, I'm not thinking only of recruitments. When I think of human resources, I'm thinking of issues that arise. Somebody to assist with just basic stuff. I'm thinking of what they do where I work, which is things like vacation planning, any complaints that arise or that kind of thing with an office staff. So it's for all of the various human resources components that I'm thinking of also.
Yeah, so those we share with the service.
Okay. The final question is that Ottawa's fairly unique in the sense that, we have a fairly significant parliamentary precinct within the city for the federal government, where that naturally attracts a certain amount of interaction, and as well with the Ontario Provincial Police. Something that I'm sure the Toronto Provincial Police, or the Toronto Police also has, is that interface with OPP. But can you comment at all on the idea of that interface, particularly with the parliamentary precinct, that might add to the board's human resource needs?
I am not familiar with any kind of work that the board has been doing along these lines. What interface there is primarily operational, so that's up to the service.
Okay.
And we don't, to my knowledge at least, we don't interact very frequently with the OPP.
Okay. And so it doesn't come up in the policy or any of those elements related, like the interface with the OPP never comes up. I mean, there is the provincial parliament piece, and I know that there are demonstrations and things at Queen's Park, but there's no policy analysis or implications for the Police Services Board in Toronto in relation to the additional work that might come up because of what the service has to do in relation to the government, the legislature of Ontario.
Not that I'm aware of. Where there are what we may call critical points, and there's a need to engage more directly with other services, not necessarily the OPP, but other services around Toronto. Those are brought to the information of the board, and there's a discussion revolving around that specific instance when appropriate.
Okay. And can you give us an idea of the kind of items for which you might bring in additional resources very specifically? Like, are there any points of board work where your board has found you have found as executive director that you need additional personnel to assist with?
So there's bargaining. That's a point where we usually refer to external sources, and it's not really subject-based rather than the size of the project. So I mentioned the workplace harassment project. That was a large-scale project that we couldn't undertake by ourselves. We've recently, not recently, but in the last couple of years, we've been working with the Auditor General of Toronto, who's been doing some audits on behalf of the board. And that's where they bring in their expertise in auditing to bear on that. But it really depends on the scope of the project and where it exceeds what the capacity is for the board staff, rather than specific topics.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Those are my questions, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much. Have you given much thought at the Toronto Police Services Board as to the new legislation that's not enforced yet, that was passed in 2019, and the impacts that will have on the work that your board does?
Absolutely, that's motivating a lot of the work that we've been doing. We've been engaged in a strategic planning process now, expecting that to come into force. To the degree that it impacts staffing requirements, it's just a question of where do we need to do where the policies need to evolve based on that. But I don't think I can say anything beyond that, really.
Okay, thanks. Chief, I don't know if like while we have Doobie here, I don't know if you had, from your perspective, from the service perspective, any questions or comments?
Yeah, no, interesting conversation, and there's no doubt it's a complex operation that has a small but mighty team here in Ottawa, and that opportunity to build that team, to make sure that we're together with the board completing the work we need to, is important. So really good conversation, but thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I can say, with regards to the work with the chief, which is not something I talked about, in addition to the direct relationship between the chair and the chief, which is ongoing, there's the board staff allows to have more direct interaction with various people in the chief's office, and gives us an opportunity to discuss reports as they are being created, and making sure that the reports that get to the board address the needs of the board more effectively. So we have these continuous discussions on subjects that the chief's office intends to bring before the board, and we can advise them on areas that they might want to focus on, certain statistics that they might have not considered that would be relevant, and other perspectives that sometimes are not necessarily front of mind for a service, but are relevant for the board's work. So that's another thing that our board office provides as a service.
Thanks. I think that's Dewey, that's very helpful. From my perspective, I think that we as a committee need to think about where do we want to go from here, and how do we get there. And it's probably going to be a multi-year plan to evolve. And I think based on what you said as well, Dewey, adjusting as we go along and seeing what capacity we need. And I tend to agree with you, to find one person to sort of fulfill those two key roles is probably a pretty tall order. And not only to have somebody that has all the different skill sets, but also I think there's a significant amount of work probably associated with that, especially standing these up. That would be pretty challenging. But I do think that by having the proper supports in place, it'll assist board members and provide an increased value. I think in the big picture, it also helps the service, and we all have that same common objective of making sure that we have adequate and effective policing in the city. I'm wondering as well, to my fellow members, board members, if there's value in having a discussion at the policy and governance committee as far as those roles, because I think a lot of this is actually creating that capacity to make sure that we have adequate and effective governance in place as well. So that we might want to have a discussion in that form as well, because this is really goes to how the board carries out its functions, its oversight functions, and its governance role. So I don't know if anybody has any suggestions as to sort of next steps. I think that it would be helpful to maybe for the executive director to come back with a sort of a draft plan of how we could move forward, that we could take to the board on, you know, what sort of in the, you know, a shorter term and medium term approach to what resources would be important, what the roles would be, skill sets, and much of that has been covered here today, but being able to put that forward as a suggestion or as a proposal for the board to consider. So any comments from my fellow board members on that?
So maybe I'll
Go ahead, Gil. Sorry.
Sorry, Michael. Maybe, so I was going to start, I have a lot of opportunity to be with the executive director, and so I can certainly see the amount of work that she's doing. And what we heard this morning really, really strikes me as being a wise thing. I think when this work, as we contemplate, I like the idea of bringing it forth and having the Policy and Governance Committee take a look at it, because we need to be sure that we are fulfilling all of the governance requirements that we have. I will say, just knowing myself, all that the executive director has on her plate as we prepare as well for community consultations and a strategic plan. I mean, we want the permanent staffing to be carefully done, but we know that there's going to be a period of intense activity around strategic planning and even around the process of thinking, what do we need? What do we actually need? What skill sets, what people? We've had assistance from the executive director of the Toronto Police Services Board. But I'm worried about how much that plan entails and whether or not in the midst of our community consultations, the executive director actually has time to take that on. So maybe what we look to is a plan from her that allows both a permanent structure as well as any temporary assistance that might be needed, either in terms of assisting her with the plan or in terms perhaps of the strategic planning that we know we have to do within a short time. Those are the two thoughts that I have, and it's very possible because there's no doubt that she works very hard at this, that the executive director has a lot of that already planned, but I have to say I'm not certain of that.
Thanks. Member Doucette, were you going to add something?
I was going to add some stuff, but Gail covered it all. So I'm, really happy to have this discussion at the P&G committee as well. I think that's really important. And yes, we've got a lot of work to do here, but it'll get us to a better place for sure.
Yeah, and I think, we're all in agreement that the capacity isn't there that is needed, and so I think it's important that we start making progress in that direction. So we'll, I think, Krista, we'll put this on for the Policy and Governance Committee, at least have a discussion on it. But I would also like us to have a discussion, Chair, if you're in agreement at the next board meeting to just a discussion, because I don't think it's something that we can be putting off for a long time. So if we could have a discussion around that and maybe start a process, at least I know we had one extra position, but to start thinking about not only the staffing of that, but which, what roles are most important right at the start to continue with this. Deputy Bell, you had your hand up.
Yeah, my apologies. I just, my flag would be, can we just try and make sure that we line this up with our budget process as we go into budget season? Because I would imagine there'll be budget asks come out of that, and we have a pretty definitive timeline. So just something to take into consideration around the planning.
No, thanks. Great point. And I think that, with the timelines the way they are, that probably will line up fairly well as we go. So then that the Ottawa Police Services Board Human Resources Committee received this item for information and discussion. Is the item received?
Received.
Yeah. Okay. And go ahead.
As part of our process, do we need a specific motion to direct this to go to policy and governance or to the board? Just
I don't
not
think
sure
so.
of that yet.
Krista, I don't think so. Krista, do you want to comment?
Sure. Yeah, you don't need a specific motion. You can just give staff direction, which I've taken down in terms of bringing this forward to P&G and at the board meeting, and also looking to develop some sort of plan, both short and medium term, including looking at temporary staffing solutions.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Doobie, thank you again so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate it. And we're really happy to learn from that Toronto experience and, the successes you've had from the way that it's the board office is developed there. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we'll go on to the next item. It's item 5.2, which is Executive Command Performance Evaluation Framework. For this item, the Executive Director prepared a report to bring us all up to speed on where the development of a new Executive Performance Evaluation Framework left off. With the new board and a new Executive Command team in place, I think we have an opportunity to provide some input and direction with respect to the updated framework. And depending on our discussions, we may want to consider whether we are satisfied with the direction the updated framework is moving in and direct the Executive Director to re-engage the consultant to sort of finalize that and bring it to the board bring a final version to the board for approval. But however, before jumping ahead, I would like to open up the item for comments from, both the committee members, but also the Executive Command. And Chief, I was hoping in particular that maybe you could provide us an update on the status of the performance management system within the service, because I think this sort of lines up, should be aligned then with the performance management system for the chief and the executive team.
Or, Mr. Chair, do you want me to make comments now or wait for the
Yeah,
boards?
sure, please. I'd just be interested in your comments, and then we can have a discussion.
Sure. Yeah. So we this last version here, we received it late last week, and as a team, unfortunately with leave, we haven't had a chance to come together as a group to discuss it. But individually, we've had some discussion. So obviously, the overall document and what is the goal of what is trying to be accomplished is, I think we're in line with. There's some things there that, in terms of the universal competencies, we want to make sure we fully understand the direction of the board and where we want to make sure that we're focusing on as individuals. And what's interesting for me with this particular document or this draft is sort of that command team assessment as well too, of how we're doing as a team is how I'm reading it, and so I think there's value in that as well. We certainly want to obviously we agree with establishing a program and making sure that as individuals we understand what we have to do, as a team what we have to do. And this is certainly going along that path of something that will be of value. Having been subjected to a lot of different types of assessment processes in my career, some of it is unwieldy and it's hard to manage, and it's hard to to look people in the eye to say, yes, I have accomplished everything that's in there. So it has to be manageable, achievable, and measurable. And finding that balance is always important. In regards to our, the overall, I know Deputy Bell, you have our CHRO, Lisa Bianco here. At least I did. Oh, there she is. And she is developing the performance measurement for the outfit for the whole service, and it's a new process that we're launching in December. It does have some of these universal competencies as well too that we're adopting, but it is not 100% baked yet or rolled out. So comparing the two for me right now is a bit difficult. But Lisa, I don't know if you have any comments in terms of our new program that we're rolling out.
Sure, happy to speak to that. Thanks, Chief. So we are doing some work at really sort of fleshing out the metric and management and sort of performance indicators that we're going to see out of the universal competencies. So we have our sort of traditional competencies around communication, leadership that I'm sure you're all familiar with, that are really sort of fleshed out. We've been using them for a long time, and they have those kind of key performance indicators really well articulated for the competency. And when the universal competencies were developed, they were sort of developed at a higher level program level around these are sort of 3 sets of values and that we want to see in people. We're doing the work now to really sort of flesh out what that means at the tactical level for all of our various roles, because these competencies are universal. They apply to every role we have at the service. And so we really sort of have to reimagine and articulate what that means for a constable, what that means for a police communicator, what that means for a financial analyst. So that work is underway. We hope to have it done by the end of the year when we launch our performance review cycle for the calendar year. So we're doing some sort of maintenance right now with respect to those competencies. And that's the status for us this year in 2023. We're going to run our cycle as normal in December. Happy to answer more questions if you have them with respect to that, but that's sort of our program at a high level right now.
Thanks, Lisa. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much, and good to get that update. I do think that one of the important things here too is to make sure that when we think about succession planning and future leaders at the command level, that that is aligned with what's happening with the service, and then all obviously then with what we expect from the command team. So that alignment, I think, will be important. So fellow committee members, any comments, observations, or discussion points on this issue?
No, I'm good on that.
Okay, so would you be in agreement that we have the executive director go back to the consultant just to finalize this? Because it was sort of left, I don't know, Krista, was it like 75, 90, 80, 90% finished, or?
At the time, it was kind of, I'd say 80 to 85% of the way there. We had some final tweaks to do. But what we could look at is, because what part of the consultant's work last time was to speak directly with the command team members individually to get their feedback. And given that the team has changed quite a bit since this work was done, we could always ask the consultant to speak with the command team again, just to one-on-one to get some individual feedback and maybe get it a little bit closer to where it needs to be.
Any comments from committee members? Because I think it'd be nice to finalize this and then take it to the board for approval. Final package, I think is, and so I think just Krista, how my view would be is whatever, just to get this sort of finalized, the point where we can have that discussion then at the board. That would, I don't think it's necessarily needs a lot of work, but kind of work. I don't want to create any or suggest any unnecessary work, but just to get at the point that we're comfortable with it. I think here now is that we'd be able to take to the board for a discussion there and approval. Okay, so that the Ottawa Police Services Board Human Resource Committee receive this item for information and discussion as per our discussion here. So, oh, sorry, I see the chief's got his hand up.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I was a bit late there as you put your head down and started reading, and I put it up. In terms of Krista's comment on the consultant, it might, I was just going to suggest it might be if it might take time to individually do that, but perhaps if there is an opportunity to meet with a consultant as a group, and we have one meeting and provide some feedback, and then it can go, directly, back to the board. Perhaps we can do that in a fairly, well, I mean, summer is tough sometimes, but we can do this fairly quickly and get some feedback to the consultant and wrap it up. Just a suggestion that we're willing to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense given that work was done already. And I think this is more just a signals check before finalizing it.
Right. Yeah, I think the comment that Krista makes is that it has changed over. The consultant likely spoke with mainly a different group of people just on the initial wave of discussion, and maybe we can just add a little bit to that and nail it down.
Yeah. Okay. And Deputy Bill.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to make sure, I just want to reiterate one of the statements that Lisa made. The whole performance management, performance assessment is based around the 3 universal competencies. We don't yet have nailed down the anchors of those universal competencies. So we have work to do there in terms of getting the information, sharing it with the board to make sure it's in line with what they want to assess us on. So I do think there'll need to be some service board interaction so that we're not rolling this out and all have a different view on what a selfless leader is.
No, it's and that's a valid point. So what's your timeline on that, Steve?
So we're working on it through the fall. We're looking to have it ready for the implementation at the end of this year of our revised performance management plan. So it will be through this fall, and we will be doing consultation interaction around that, and we can make sure Lisa can let me know whether I'm stepping outside the bounds, but we can make sure to have the board engaged in that as well so that the HR committee has the ability to provide input.
Yeah, okay, so I'm wondering if we maybe bring Krista, if you maybe do that check-in with the consultant just to check and see, okay, what level of effort is required just to sort of finalize that aspect, and maybe we come back to the committee along with the work that the service is doing, just to make sure there's alignment before we take it to the board. Does that make sense to everybody? I mean, my one concern on this is that from a timing perspective, I don't think we're going to change this now, is this, that, we're going along without having as solid a process in place maybe as we need. So we're going through this, a little bit of a transition, but I'd rather, from my perspective, at least, make sure we get this right, and moving forward, that it's well understood and it's a good process. And going back to the chief's comments too, it's got to be something that's viable and easily applied, and because we've had those experiences of something that is so unwieldy, then it doesn't really meet the needs. So and any other comments on that? Because otherwise I'd just say that we'll say this item's received to come back for one final check with the committee after some consultation with a consultant and with the service on the work they're doing. Is the item received?
Received.
Received.
Okay. Great, thanks. Is there any other business? Okay, so at this time, then we will consider a motion to move in camera, that the Ottawa Police Services Board Human Resources Committee adjourn the public portion of its meeting to move in camera to discuss confidential items pertaining to 5 labor relations matters pursuant to Section 35(4)(b) of the Police Services Act. Is the motion carried?
So moved, yes. Carrie.
So our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, September the 5th at 2:30 p.m. At this time, we will move in camera. Thank you.